Hello everyone, and welcome to this information session for the Ukraine Civil Society Facility. On behalf of the EU delegation, it is my great pleasure to welcome you to this thematic information session. My name is Sinziana Poiana. I work for the EU delegation to Ukraine, and I cover civil society support there. The reason you're here is because you are interested in one of the lots that make available funding for civil society organizations within our recently launched call on the 16th of June. In this session, you will hear more of why we chose this specific thematic priority, what do we expect from civil society to deliver, why do we focus on certain types of actions, why do we choose certain type of organizations to be eligible to apply and access this funding. So for the next 45 minutes or so, you will hear presentations from colleagues from the EU delegation to Ukraine who will speak to you about the specific sector you are interested in, but also we will take some of your questions that you submitted through your registration form and try to answer them as good as possible and as interesting for you as possible. A small reminder, even though you submitted questions through the registration form, do not forget to also send them to our email address and ask for official clarifications if you need them or if you have further inquiries that you would like to make. You have this possibility open until July 24. Before we move to the presentation of the specific thematic area, I would just like to recall a few elements of the call. For those of you who are not able to attend the general information session on June 22nd, please take a moment and have a look at it on EU Prosteer website. You will be able to retrieve the recording for that session and hopefully have your own presentation of what the general call is about, if it is easier for you to do it that way than by reading the guidelines. I wish you all the best of luck with the application for this call, and I do hope that this information session will be very useful for the design of your concept note and that you will finally decide to apply for this call and be successful to the next stage. Until then, deadline 14th of August, remember, stay well and safe.
Colleagues, good morning to everybody. I hope all of you see me and hear me well. My name is Dobromir Christov. I'm a project manager in the EU delegation in charge of public administration reform. And I would lead the short part, which will deal with presentations of the two sectors, the subsectors that we are having the sessions on. This is the PAR and the PFM. So I'm going to invite two of my colleagues to do short presentations on PAR and PFM, which will be followed by a Q&A session from the questions that we did receive through your registration form. So once again, I would join Sinziana by welcoming all of you, and I'm very happy that we have such an overwhelming participation today, as PAR and PFM are key reforms for the EU in Ukraine, and I'm very much looking forward to very good proposals by the mid-August 2020. Now, without further ado, I would give the floor to my colleague Ugis Six, who is the team leader of our flagship project, EU for PAR. Ugis, the floor is yours. I'm just going to share the presentation now.
Good early afternoon, everybody. I apologize that this time I'm doing it off the camera just for the connectivity reasons. It's the midsummer in the place where I am at the moment, and we are all in the deep countryside during yesterday and today. As Dobromir said, my name is Ugis Sits. I'm the team leader of the EU for PAR project. That's the project that supports the government of Ukraine in implementation of public administration reform strategy. The European Union is the main supporter of this process, and not only through the EU for PAR project, but also through multiple other means. In the next 10 minutes, I will talk about few topics that I hope will help you to think about your project ideas and preparation of proposals. And I'm also happy to pick up the questions. First of all, I will briefly explain what is the public administration in Ukraine, as well as talk about how the European Union sees the top priorities of this process at the moment, and by that I mean 1 to 3 years. I will also talk about my views on what could be the role of the civil service or civil society organizations in the public administration reform process. And gradually this will allow me to shift to explaining the objectives of this call for proposal and also hinting some of the ideas what could be potentially eligible project proposals from you. As well as I will point out further information sources that you can use in your process. But before I do that, I also wanted to say that for those of us who are in the PAR process on daily basis, we very much and very often look always for civil society organizations, for experts outside the government to engage them in public administration reform process, to consult with them, to see how can we join up forces. And irrespective of the outcome of this call for proposals, I hope we can find a way of being in touch. I'm sure you are already, or if not, you will be subscribers of the news on public administration reform. And I hope that this interaction can lead to more active engagement of you in the process, irrespective of the outcome of the application. So let's do it. First, I'll start with the brief explanation of public administration reform as such. In Ukraine, EU supports public administration very much based on the government's strategy of public administration reform. I think that's already to the next slide. The strategy was adopted in 2016, immediately following adoption of the law on civil service, which puts the grounds for public administration, European public administration in Ukraine. And the current strategy of the government runs till the end of 2021. And it is highly likely that that strategy will be either extended in scope and time post 21, or there will be a new follow-up strategy to continue with the reform in this area. Ukraine's public administration reform strategy is very much based on European principles of public administration as developed by OECD Sigma. And at the end of my presentation, for those of you who are not familiar with this framework, I'll give a link to the documents that you can read and familiarize yourself with those principles. Strategy was developed on the basis of those principles. In 2018, jointly the government and OECD Sigma carried out so-called baseline measurement of Ukraine's public administration vis-a-vis those principles, and the public administration reform strategy was amended to take them into account. So my message one to all of you is, if you're looking for inspiration, if you're looking for ideas, the key documents for you to read is the government public administration reform strategy and the annual reports. There are 2 reports so far, 2018 and 2019, and it's the OECD Sigma principles as well as OECD Sigma 2018 baseline measurement report on Ukraine. Those are available on websites I'll give you at the end of this presentation. So we talk about 6 main areas in public administration reform in Ukraine. I will talk about 5 of them, starting with 1, the people, the civil service. The 6th one will be picked up by my colleague. So the first pillar, the key pillar of the reform is about the people. The law on civil service was put in place in 2016, and in fact is the basis of EU support in this area to Ukraine by ensuring that civil service continues to develop in line with the spirit of this law, that is the principles of European public administration, as well as at the same time, the civil service is being continuously modernized in line with the requirements of the time, technology, etc. So specifically, this area of public administration reform is about how to popularize the civil service, how to attract more qualified candidates to civil service, how to ensure a selection process through which the best of the best are chosen in fair and transparent and merit-based way, and how to develop them as professionals once they are in the civil service, as well as how to create conditions where they can be proper civil servants who can be free and frank advisors to the government on the policies and legislation and help to implement the policies and legislation. And the law on civil service and few pieces of secondary legislation are the key elements in this process. The second element of public administration reform is about the organizations where civil servants work in. That is about various initiatives, how to ensure that public administration, with all variety of organizations that exist in it, are efficiently organized, both within each organization and across the whole public administration. It is about making sure that every organization of public administration functions transparently and also is accountable for the results, is accountable for implementation of legislation, and is accountable to the higher level body of each of the organizations. It is also about making sure that various business processes within organizations and across organizations, for example, financial management, human resource management, IT management, etc., are organized efficiently and cost effectively. And here the law on Cabinet of Ministers and the law on central executive bodies is the framework that sets how organizations operate and what is possible and what is not. The third area is about a very critical process and the core process of public administration. That is how legislation and the policies preceding legislation get identified, prepared, adopted, communicated, and adjusted if necessary. So what public administration reform in this area does, it helps to create procedures, capacities, and technology so that government's decisions are transparent, well thought through, meaning based on evidence, that the process of adopting those decisions is genuinely inclusive, and that there is reasonable time for this process available. And here we talk of the law on Cabinet of Ministers and the rules of procedure of the government and rules of procedure of Verkhovna Rada as the main framework documents that set this process. The fourth area is about what we call visible part of public administration, because 1, 2, and 3 are parts of public administration that are very important for civil servants, for political representatives, etc. But they're not much visible on daily basis to citizens. The fourth pillar is the one where citizens feel public administration every day. And that is about the services that citizens receive from the state, as well as about compliance with various obligations set in the law by citizens and businesses. For example, receiving passport or paying taxes or getting the pension, getting the permit for buildings, etc., etc. And here what public administration does, it tries to make the services that citizens and businesses receive as user-friendly as possible. This nowadays means also as digital as possible, as seamless as possible. Sometimes it means not service at all and things being handled by the government on behalf of citizens invisibly. But it's also about the procedures that govern relationship between citizens and the state when it relates to services or to fulfilling certain obligations of citizens. And those rules should be clear, transparent, unified, simple, understandable, and very much respect the rights of citizens. The area number 5 is about how government manages public financial resources, and that will be something that my colleague will address a little later. And the 6th pillar here is about the public administration reform as a policy in itself. We say public administration reform is like any other policy, and as such, it should be well-defined in an inclusive process by consulting stakeholders. It should be evidence-based, well-communicated, financed in the budget. There should be proper implementation and coordination mechanism, as well as monitoring, reporting, and accountability for results. Here, the key documents are Public Administration Reform Strategy, the annual reports, Public Administration Reform Coordination Council's decisions, etc. So, across this variety of topics, what EU supports? Of course, European Union supports implementation of the whole public administration reform strategy, and even broader, implementation of European principles of public administration, which is the center of EU support to public administration reform in many countries. However, as there are more than 30 such principles and many priorities, we always have to talk about priorities of priorities. And on this slide, you will see my attempt to say what are the priorities of priorities from the European perspective in the next period, that is 1 to 3 years. So first of all, it is about continuation of public administration reform as such, about political and other priority of this reform, as public administration reform is the one that is the basis for other reforms to happen, because other reforms are designed and implemented by other institutions, and the public administration reform is about capacity of those institutions to do so. Secondly, it is about civil service, and specifically about attraction and merit-based selection of civil servants who would work in the civil service. Thirdly, it is about what we call rules of the game or framework legislation. In other words, every public administration is based on 5 basic laws that govern how public administration operates. That is the law on civil service, that is law on cabinet of ministers, that is law on central executive bodies, or in some countries it's called law on public administration. And it is about the budget system law, as well as law on administrative procedures. So reform, and very much from the European perspective, is about putting in place those rules of the game that correspond to the European principles of public administration. The 4th high-level priority for the EU is about capacity, organization and capacity of ministries. Ministries play a critical role in the process of implementing policies, including association agreement commitments, and they should be organized effectively, and they should have good capacity. The reforms in this area have been started since 2017, but need to continue to complete that process. 5th is about more evidence-based decision-making process. That is how legislation is made, what procedures there are for engaging with civil society, for consultations, for evidence-based decision-making, for communication of adopted legislation, and how to improve legislation as such. And again, that is very critical for implementation of the association agreement commitments. Last but not least, and this is very big priority for the EU in the next period, that is about adoption and implementation of the law on administrative procedure, which is also one of those 5 key framework laws that I talked about. This law is critical piece of legislation for governing relationships between citizens and business on one hand, and the state on the other hand, when it comes to all sorts of administrative procedures and services. Currently, Ukraine misses such legislation, and it needs to be put in place in the nearest future. Now, what can civil society do in all this process? Of course, there can be many views on that. I came up with 4 basic ideas. So first of all, civil society is about kind of a watchdog function, I call it. It's about monitoring reform, providing independent perspective of what's going on in terms of implementing the priorities, the commitments, but also identifying what is missing, etc. So helping to keep the reform on track. Secondly, it's also about what I call voice, that is helping various interest groups, associations, regions, employment groups, etc., to represent themselves in the government's policy process, but also give a voice in the public administration reform process. Thirdly, it's something that I called contributors or experts. Public administration reform is always looking for experts in one or another topic, theme, region, etc., that can take part in designing public administration reform as such, or specific initiatives as part of this reform, or helping to implement them. And last but not least, it is about partnership between the government and civil society organizations or networks, platforms, forums that can help to engage in discussions around public administration, about communication of public administration on daily basis with the government, with the EU, etc. And I must say that as somebody who is insider in the public administration reform process in Ukraine, we are always looking for civil society voice, for more expertise, etc. Now, in terms of this specific call for proposals, of course, I cannot say too specifically about this, as you are the ones who will be coming up with creative and interesting ideas. But the objective of this call, of course, is to support public administration reform in Ukraine in line with European principles of public administration. And it boils down to better public administration that is also able to realize the benefits brought forward by the association agreement. That is to help to design and implement reforms. More specifically, it is about support to promotion of public administration in general or in specific areas. And by promotion, I mean not only communication, but also dialogue, engagement, deepening of thinking, etc. Secondly, it's about keeping public administration reform on track through providing independent insight, through being a watchdog, to helping to monitor the process, to helping to identify the problems, to help identify gaps, etc. And thirdly, it is about helping the government to be innovative, to base its decisions on evidence, to come up with interesting, good proposals, to be kind of this expert center of public administration reform. And the civil society organizations can be very effective, independent and sustainable competence centers in helping to achieve all those objectives. Now, to move forward, I will of course not provide you with any specific ideas, but in each of those 4 areas that I mentioned, watchdog, voice, contributor, and partner, there are things that potentially, I think evaluators of the cost proposal might be looking for. That is for civil society assisting with monitoring of public administration reform, especially its top priorities, the ones that I mentioned in my earlier slides, like law and administrative procedure, merit-based recruitment. It is also about creating mechanisms, processes, history, experience of engaging various associations, interest groups, forums, etc. in government's policy making, but also indirectly in public administration reform, creating consultation capabilities on policies. It's also about specific expertise in very specific topics, helping the government to design and implement public administration reform projects. And here again, law and administrative procedure, I think, would be a very important priority, provided it is adopted and will be implemented in the next 2, 3, 4 years. And last but not least, it's also about civil society networks, platforms, forums, etc., which can be used on systematic basis to help the government, to promote reform, but also to keep it on track, to ensure accountability, and to ensure extra expertise. this is very much in brief. There's probably a lot you can read. I included here the three main sources that could be useful to you. That is about European principles of public administration. You can find very generalized information as very, very specific, this detailed description of each principle and the methodology behind it on the Sigma web. You can also consult the government site with the reports and policy documents that cover the whole cycle of public administration reforms since 2016. And there are also other sources such as PAR in UA, that is an independent website supported by EU for Power project, which includes all sorts of historical information as well as actual news on public administration reform as currently. And also Facebook page of the Reform Delivery Office that provides a lot of up-to-date news on public administration reform. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ugis, for your wonderful presentation. Probably we could first go with a presentation of Alexandra Janowska, our colleagues in charge of public finance management in the EU delegation, and we can address the question and answers. Alexandra, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Dobromir. So I'm Alexandra. I work in the EU delegation on public finance management reforms. I would like to welcome everyone who is interested in these topics and encourage your applications. I don't have a PowerPoint presentation. It's a very short presentation that just a little bit goes through the areas that we have identified and explains the background and the rationale. So let me start, of course, by saying that the public finance area is a very important area in EU-Ukraine cooperation, and in many instances there are direct commitments of Ukraine in the association agreement. There are also many other contexts in which we discuss these reforms and support them. In particular, we have the so-called high-level policy dialogue that takes place on a regular basis, where important public finance management topics are discussed. We also support the government in implementing some of these reforms. In particular, at the moment, we have three projects that the EU, well, three or more, I don't know, that EU finances through our implementing partners. One on local governments, support to the local governments. I will be very fast just to give you, this overall picture before entering into the specific areas. Then the second project that we have, it's called EU for PFM. There we even now have a Facebook website where you can trace the progress. This now is a big project, the biggest so far. It's 55 million euro for 4 years. But this again focuses mainly on our interaction with the authorities and supporting them in improving, their capacities and performance. And the third project is that the one we have with the EU, with the World Bank, World Bank Trust Fund, together with the EU, and there again there are specific targeted interventions with the Ministry of Finance. Now that's the overall context where we stand in this area. It's important to mention, as Ugis did for the public administration reform, that in all these endeavors, EU really supports government's reform agenda. We don't in a sense, we are supporting government activities in those areas where there is really rationale and the desire to improve things. And there, I hope you're aware, or those of you who are interested in these topics are aware that there is a PFM strategy, reform strategy of the government adopted in 2017 that runs out until this year, basically. and the government is now preparing a new strategy to update it and to go further. This strategy, I just checked again on the website of the Ministry of Finance. I found a PowerPoint presentation on the strategy itself, with a quite comprehensive PowerPoint, quite detailed. And also there was a linked action plan, detailed action plan in this sort of classical Ukrainian style of presentation with specific deliverables, etc. in all those areas. And the government actually even is, does the regular quarterly implementation reports, saying what was done, what was not done, etc. These reports, they're somewhere on the Ministry of Finance website, but they are a little bit hidden, it seems, because spontaneously I didn't find them. But some of the information, you know, is on the Ministry of Finance website, hidden or not hidden, so it's good for you to look at that information if you are considering to become active in one of these areas, and to provide civic monitoring, control, engagement, awareness raising in these areas. Yeah. So just to be a little bit more specific, so there is a PFM strategy of the government, there is a PFM action plan, EU supports that. So basically all areas covered by the strategies are very important. And you will find in the 6 points that we have put in the terms of reference for this specific call that on which we are now presenting, basically almost all of these areas are covered. But just let me for 1 second a little bit talk about those main pillars. What are we talking about? So the PFM strategy of the government is structured in 4 components. One is fiscal discipline, which includes the revenue mobilization issues, so the tax system, the macroeconomic and budgetary forecast. The medium-term budgeting is also under this fiscal discipline, so going beyond the 1-year budgeting. Fiscal risk management, another new important area that the government wants to tackle within this area. Debt management, better debt management, and better liquidity management. So this was component 1. Component 2 was efficiency of resource allocation. There, it's mainly, again, about budgetary issues, strengthening strategic planning of the government activities, strengthening program-based budgeting. Probably you know that budgets in Ukraine are organized according to programs, but there are some weaknesses about these programs and indicators linked to that. So the second pillar is really going for the improvements in this budgetary area, as well as further work on fiscal decentralization. So everything about subnational governments and improvement of this process. The third pillar of the government's PFM strategy is budget execution. So strengthening budget, improve more efficient budget execution in specific areas. So here, those areas are covered that are about public procurement, investment management, better quality accounting standards in public sector, as well as, of course, internal control and internal financial audit of budgetary surplus in Ukraine. So this all makes sense. So there was something about how the funds are collected, how the funds are planned, budgetary funds are planned, and then how they are executed. So these are the 3 pillars. The 4th pillar is about transparency and accountability, covering those type of things like citizens' budgets, yeah, the presentation, the transparent presentation of this information to the citizens and to the civil society. So I would stop here. So, and honestly, to say, the strategy is a strong strategy. We hope that the next strategy that the government is now working on will be as strong and as ambitious. But, you know, of course, it's always the question to what extent the good intentions are there, but, you know, how is it really done then in the reality? What are the key performance indicators where they achieved? There are many interesting questions on which we expect actually the Ministry of Finance to come up soon with a comprehensive analytical report on these issues to explain to what extent this current strategy has been implemented, what were the weaknesses. And in this context, let me mention to you another important reference, which is the PEFA, which is a standardized assessment of exactly public finance management areas that was just undertaken by the World Bank expert team last year and was just published maybe a month ago. It's both referenced on the EU website as well as World Bank website. And this assessment, to those who are not familiar with that, it's very analytical, very, methodologically clear, going to assessing areas, all these PFM areas one by one, really showing the weaknesses. It's not a general, text describing situation. It's really going for the indicators, giving the grades, etc. So for those of you who are want to really look into this independent assessment of the current Ukraine's public finance management situation, I really recommend this PEFA assessment to look at. So, and this brings me now to those areas that we have identified, the 6 areas for this call. So I will just go through them very fast because, you can read them as well, just to maybe underline some of the details. So as you see, we are covering really broad number of areas, starting from public procurement contracts monitoring. So we felt it was an important area on which there was a specific, let's say, maybe weakness in the government system, because public procurement reform, as everyone knows, even outside Ukraine, was one of the really flagship reforms of the post-Maidan governments. And strong capacities have been established in the government to really improve the system, etc. But the monitoring of public procurement contracts still is an area where maybe more needs to happen at the government level. But of course, it's an area where a lot of data is available through Dozoro system also. So this gives an additional interest, analytical capacity for also civil society to look into that and to maybe provide useful insights for the public about public procurement contracts, its functioning, and yeah. While in parallel, the government is supposed to build up these capacities, of course, on their own. A second area that we mentioned is the budget planning and execution. So for as well as central as well as subnational levels of government, and this really is a broad area that includes classical budget planning, as well as spending reviews, now a very hot topic for the last 2 years at least, where the government encouraged, the Ministry of Finance encouraged the line ministries and agencies to really look into the structure of their spendings and try to, let's say, find ways to optimize them, yeah? But it's a very early stage still, and maybe, again, a lot of budgetary data is available online, so maybe there is an interest of civil society to also be active and more active in this area. The third area that we mentioned was related to revenue mobilization, so the reform of state tax service and state customs services. Again, yeah, we felt that it's a very important area for Ukraine because, of course, that's the revenue side. That's how the state gets the most of its revenues. And improving of the systems is a key priority, we know, for the government. It's also a key priority for our EU support programs. But civil society's role can be very important in these reforms. And we specifically put in brackets that it's not just about the, let's say, core business processes. Really, let's say, sometimes, tax administration, people think about tax audits or tax services. Of course, that's like the most obvious things that you think, and they also need to improve and need to be monitored by civil society maybe more. But even those, let's say, more indirect dimensions of tax and customs administration like integrity policies, anti-corruption policies of those institutions. Again, we feel these, let's say, more softer functions, they are absolutely crucial, and the more civil society puts interest and focus on them, the more maybe the government will be feeling the need to reform and improve those areas. Then the fourth area, we a little bit just grouped this, saying that other elements of public finance management strategy could be covered in the sense of civic monitoring. Because again, we could not cover all sub areas of PFM reform that I explained to you, because it also includes external audit, internal control, so many further areas. So we just sort of grouped them here for potential interested civil society organizations if they consider being active in those areas. And then we outlined a little bit two further areas that are maybe not that much covered in the PFM strategy of the Ministry of Finance, but they're also still very important. And the reason they're not covered is just because they are a little bit under responsibility of a different ministry. So there was just a cross-reference from the PFM strategy to other strategies of the government. And with this, I mean specifically the public investment management area and the reform of state-owned enterprises. So these two areas are still also part of our call because, of course, they have absolutely crucial impact on public finances, and we felt it was important to also, include them here in our priority list. And with this, I would like to finish my presentation. I hope it was useful and comprehensive, and I'm open for questions.
Thank you very much, Alexandra. Thank you very much, Dobro and Ugis. Two excellent presentations. Maybe to give you a little bit of context, the reason why, and you probably noticed these two presentations were quite technical, we wanted to make sure that we have a common language as to what we understand by public administration reform and public finance management. And I sincerely hope that the two presentations you have seen gave you a little bit of a flavor of also, how relevant these topics are for public accountability in Ukraine, for advancing good governance, but also, some sources that you can rely on to when you describe your problem identification, in order for us to understand how your project will ultimately plug in to the processes that are going on in Ukraine and that the EU is following for both public administration reform and public finance management. A quick word on a summary. I'm sure that all of you have already read the guidelines. So we are speaking about Lot 4 under the recently launched call, Ukraine Civil Society Facility. I would just like to very quickly go over the main elements of the funding that is made available. So first of all, under this lot, we have €1 million that is available. You can apply with projects that request a minimum EU contribution of 600,000 and the maximum of €1 million. So you can already tell that we are interested in finding a high quality project that will be working in Ukraine for the next 2 to 3 years. The length of the project must be a minimum of 24 months, maximum 36 months. We encourage civil society organizations, so you need to be a legal entity registered, fall under our definition of civil society, which is quite broad. For your own information and check whether you are eligible to receive this funding, you can check footnote 14 of the guidelines for applicants, and there you will find our definition for what civil society is. And you will see that under this lot, we specifically encourage platforms, networks, and consortia of organizations to apply. You may be registered in Ukraine, an EU member state, an EAA state, or in an Eastern Partnership country. This extension of eligibility requirements beyond Ukraine is mostly to allow Ukrainian applicants to enter into partnership and exchange with other organizations that may have been going through following similar reforms or using similar methodologies in other countries. We have received some of your questions were related also with why should we emphasize, this part of platforms, networks, and consortia. Again, our intention, although, it would depend on the quality of the proposals that we receive finally, is to have one strong project in operating in Ukraine for the next 2 to 3 years. Therefore, it is very important for us, for you to think very well already at this stage of the concept note, how would you have a wider as possible spread over, sector governance topics, regions of Ukraine, so that at the end of this project, we would be able to draw and have policy meaningful conclusions and impact. The intention is to push you a little bit into the direction of working with or within networks, platforms, or encouraging consortia that are already working on these topics to apply. You are not obliged, so you will not be disqualified if you do not apply in a consortium. However, we do have a partnership requirement for this lot, so all applications must have a minimum of 3 co-applicants and a maximum of 10. A brief clarification also on consortia. So what we would be looking at in a consortia is whether there is some evidence of past cooperation, whether there is some sort of division of tasks within this entity that would have an objective, even if you are not registered as a consortium as such. So the registration, it can be just one of the organizations taking the lead that is registered as a civil society organization, but if there is some sort of memorandum of understanding that would say, okay, organization X does this type of work, the other organization covers this type of work, to give us this idea that, that you understood very well the width and breadth of these fields, and that utmost effort is being made to cover as much or as technically in-depth as possible. On the types of actions, Ulgis and Alexandra briefly went through the types of actions that are eligible under this call. Just like with the other lots, we have done our best to identify basically things that civil society already does in Ukraine. So from our point of view, we believe that these types of actions are completely feasible. These are things that many of you are already doing. However, if you don't find a type of action that would specifically be under our list, note that this list is not exhaustive. So of course, if you have an innovative approach or an innovative angle of looking at these fields, as long as you can justify the link with the priorities of the call and the priorities of the lot, your application will be welcome and of course evaluated by us. Another important aspect of this lot, and going back to this intention, to cover to have at least one project that would cover as much as possible, including subnational level, you are required to have financial support to third parties under this lot. There was a question specifically to this. Yes, when the guidelines say shall propose financial support to third parties, it is mandatory. That means that your application will be disqualified if it does not have financial support to third parties. Financial support to third parties in the most its most widely known version is subgranting. It is when one EU partner that has already a grant from the EU launches its own call for proposals to support other civil society organizations or other civic actors in general. This organization gets to set their own norms on, how do they select these entities, how, based on which criteria and what type of support they make available. So it can be subgranting, but it can be other forms of support as well. Some of the most common ones could be cash transfers or or prizes. So you can think creatively about this, but just bear in mind that although it is you who sets the rules, we need to be able, if you do receive this funding, we need to be able to verify that these rules have been open, transparent, provided for equal access to all potential applicants, and that they could eventually be verified by an EU auditor as well. Very briefly, this would be it. All of this information you will find in the guidelines that have been published. We received only 4 questions for this lot. And I believe they have all been answered, but just to briefly go through them, which reforms are the focus of this call. So again, references to the presentations made by Dobro, Ugis, and Alexandra, quite in depth of, you know, how should you, the priorities are in the guidelines, but how should you read them? You will find them again by maybe watching again this session, or those of you who are not able to attend to actually see the recording of this session. Then again, yes, financial support to third parties is mandatory, so you will be disqualified if it is not presented in your proposals. And that is it. So on that note, I would like to thank very, very much our presenters. It was really great to have this overview of the technicalities of each of the field, and I'm sure very, very useful for our interested civil society organizations. Thank you very much to all of you for attending, and I'm sure a lot of you will join us in exactly 8 minutes for the final thematic session information on Lot 7 on association agreement and support to think tanks. So thank you very much to all, and yes, don't forget to join us tomorrow for the first training on how to prepare your concept note, also to get you started on working on your concept note form. Thank you very much to all. Bye.